I'm Megan Marshall, just to remind you, we had all the introductions right off, and thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm a biographer, and the materials that I work with, I'm a biographer of 19th century American women. The materials I mostly work with are letters and journals, and sometimes these women might have published works. Sometimes they're artists. They have paintings or drawings or sketchbooks. And these materials, as you all know, are kept sometimes by descendants. You find the descendants and find these materials that way, but most often you can find them in archives. And that's what I want to talk about today, the pleasure of making discoveries in archives and the crying need to keep these archives going, to support them. One of the wonderful aspects of new technology is that diaries and letters, the sort of thing that I spent 20 years looking for in various libraries around the country, many of these items are now being put on the web. You can find them without even going to the city where your subject might have lived and left their papers. But what I want to talk about a bit is how exciting it is to actually have contact with these items, to go to the archive and make your own discovery yourself, not on the internet. I'm not opposed to the internet discoveries, but I want to, I'm not going to talk to you about my discoveries right now, maybe that'll come up later, but sometimes I think fiction can capture that kind of, the truth of a situation better even than nonfiction. So I'm going to read a couple of passages from two of my favorite novels, that talk about manuscript discoveries. You'll probably recognize this first one. It's from Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. The preface, the Custom House chapter. And if any of you have memorized this, studied Hawthorne so well that you know what chapter and verse, you'll see that I'm skipping a few sections here, but here's Nathaniel Hawthorne in the Custom House in Salem. But one idle and rainy day, it was my fortune to make a discovery of some little interest. Poking and burrowing into the heaped-up rubbish in the corner, unfolding one and another document and reading the names of vessels that had long ago foundered at sea or rotted at the wharves, and those of merchants never heard of now, glancing at such matters with a saddened, weary, half-reluctant interest which we bestow on the corpse of dead activity, and exerting my fancy, sluggish with little use, to raise up from these dry bones an image of the old town's brighter aspect, when India was a new region, and only Salem knew the way thither. I chanced to lay my hand on a small package, carefully done up in a piece of ancient yellow parchment. This envelope had the air of an official record of some period long past, when clerks engrossed their stiff and formal chirography on more substantial materials than at present. You see, people already in 1850 were concerned about preserving the materials of the past. There was something about it that quickened an instinctive curiosity and made me undo the faded red tape that tied up the package, with the sense that a treasure would here be brought to light. The object that most drew my attention in the mysterious package was a certain affair of fine red cloth, much worn and faded. There were traces about it of gold embroidery, which, however, was greatly frayed and defaced, so that none, or very little, of the glitter was left. It had been wrought, as was easy to perceive, with wonderful skill of needlework, and the stitch, as I am assured by ladies conversant with such mysteries, gives evidence of a now forgotten art, not to be recovered even by the process of picking out the threads. This rag of scarlet cloth, for time and wear and a sacrilegious moth, had reduced it to little other than a rag. On careful examination, assumed the shape of a letter. It was the capital letter A. My eyes fastened themselves upon the old scarlet letter and would not be turned aside. Certainly there was some deep meaning in it, most worthy of interpretation, and which, as it were, streamed forth from the mystic symbol, subtly communicating itself to my sensibilities, but evading the analysis of my mind. While thus perplexed, I happened to place it on my breast. It seemed to me The reader may smile, but must not doubt my word. It seemed to me then that I experienced a sensation not altogether physical, yet almost so, as of burning heat, and as if the letter were not of red cloth, but red-hot iron. So there's one discovery in around 1850. 150 years after that, we have A.S. Byatt in Possession. And this is how her book opens. Another library scene. The book was thick and black and covered with dust. Its boards were bowed and creaking. It had been maltreated in its own time. Its spine was missing, or rather protruded from amongst the leaves like a bulky marker. It was bandaged about and about with dirty white tape, tied in a neat bow. The librarian handed it to Roland Mitchell, a graduate student in literature, who was sitting waiting for it in the reading room of the London Library. The London Library was Roland's favorite place. It was shabby but civilized, alive with history, but inhabited also by living poets and thinkers who could be found squatting on the slotted metal floors of the stacks or arguing pleasantly at the turning of the stair. Here's another aspect of the work in the archives. You meet other people there and you can learn from them, gain ideas. So Roland has requested a book not written by his idol, Randolph Henry Ashe, he's writing about, but just a book from the library of Randolph Henry Ashe. But he feels it's wonderful just to be touching and turning the pages of the book that his idol had owned. Still, the time is wearing away. The clock ticked. Motes of dust danced in sunlight. Roland meditated on the tiresome and bewitching endlessness of the quest for knowledge. Here he sat, recuperating a dead man's reading, timing his exploration by the library clock and the faint constriction of his belly. But then, the discovery. Under page 300 lay 2 folded, complete sheets of writing paper. Roland opened these delicately. They were both letters in Ashe's flowing hand, both headed with his great Russell Street address and dated June 21st, no year. Both began, "Dear Madam," and both were unsigned. Well, what he's found were 2 love letters, never known by any other scholar, and here's his response. Roland was first profoundly shocked by these writings, and then, in his scholarly capacity, thrilled. So that's the feeling that you have when you're working in the archives and actually dealing with these materials. And you often do find things interleaved in books that, are not cataloged. These poor archivists who are struggling so to preserve and catalog, they can't possibly read every last thing in their archive. So it's up to you, the researcher, to go and find what's actually there. I think that there's something sometimes almost deceptive about what you see on the screen, on your computer screen. You may think you've got everything, but really you must go there and find what else has not been cataloged, what else is maybe even inadvertently miscatalogued. That's actually how I've made some of my important discoveries for the Peabody Sisters. I wanted to end with a relic from my own archive, which I'm going to be giving one of these to the Cambridge Historical Society. It surfaced in my mother's papers. She had been worked for the Cambridge Planning Board in the 1940s, and I want to read a little bit from this document, which is called "Smart People Will Always Live in Cambridge." Published in 1946 by the Cambridge Planning Board. This was, they said, about 300 years, a little more than 300 years after the founding of Cambridge, and the Cambridge Planning Board took it upon itself to imagine what Cambridge might be 50 years hence. I think you'll be interested to hear some of their expectations, but I think it shows a little bit about how where we are now tends to influence what we think is going to happen much more than actually the events. that will transpire. One thing was they were certain that population was stabilizing and certain to decline. So in 1946, there were about 100,000 people living in Cambridge. They thought in 1996 there would be 60,000. Well, actually, I looked this up. There are now 105,000. So they were right about it stabilizing, but it didn't decline. Here's what they thought was going to happen in the city. You'd be glad to be living in such a city, I think. There was going to be a new tea stop, they didn't call it a tea, at Fresh Pond, right by the pond. And reached by the Ringe Rapid Transit Terminal, that's what it was going to be called, opened in 1955, they expected. Adjoining the Alewife Brook Parkway, the Fresh Pond Reservation has been turned over completely to recreational uses, including bathing beaches, picnic grounds, a memorial stadium, boating, and other attractions for people of all ages. One whole heading is called Trees in Central Square. There was going to be a very elaborate restructuring of where traffic would go so that, well, they say many of the areas formerly devoted to narrow local streets have been replaced by municipal parking lots and new recreation facilities. Parking lots, as maybe others will tell us, were really thought to be great things at that time. So, but there would be trees in Central Square. The effect of the removal of traffic congestion is nowhere more apparent than in the business districts, where there was going to be a central mall, that's capitalized, central mall, in Central Square with shade trees, nurseries for small children, and benches. The arcaded walks were going to protect shoppers from the weather, and the air-conditioned stores and surrounding parking lots were going to be really a great addition to Central Square. Here's what happened along the river, or was expected to happen. The riverfront along the Charles has long since been turned over completely to recreation, a wide parkway drive flanked by innumerable parking spaces now replaces the congested traffic flow of the old Memorial Drive of 1946. Picnic grounds, amphitheater, and bathing beaches replace the stone embankment, which is now merely a memory to the oldest inhabitants. Bridges replaced by tunnels leave an uninterrupted stretch of river, a piece of open countryside in the city. Well, there's a kind of Boston-Cambridge competition going on. I think they wanted to reproduce what was going on over the Hatch Shell. They wanted that on the Cambridge side as well. They also thought that industry was going to move from Boston into Cambridge, so you wouldn't have to commute to Boston anymore. Our observer, this is observer walking around 50 years in 1996, would find that it is now possible to walk to work at one of the new atomic factories, to do all of one's shopping at the shopping center a few blocks distant, and to find play facilities for children in all parts of the city. Well, there's one thing they were right about here. That is what travel was going to become. In some ways, they were right. When travel is desired, hops by air are now the accepted fashion. Time was when only the well-to-do could contemplate a trip across continents to Europe, Australia, the Orient, Russia, or the Far East. Now there is truly but one world. Once far-off places are commonly discussed as familiar places by many of us, and the concerns of the man in the street in London, Fairbanks, or Chongqing are also our concerns. But how was this going to happen? How were we going to get to Logan Airport? The helicopter landings. Scattered throughout the city, in strategic points, operate a shuttle service to the Logan International Airport and the Bedford Airport. So I just want to leave that with you as a caution about thinking into the future. We don't really know what's going to happen. We can't always plan based on what we think is going on now. And, well, I think you could all agree that smart people will always live in Cambridge.